Marjorie Greene tried to humiliate AOC, but AOC ended her career in 8 words. It was supposed to be a takedown, a setup, a televised ambush designed to turn Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez into a meme, a meltdown, a cautionary tale for women who dare to speak boldly. Marjorie Taylor Greene had the crowd, the cameras, and the cutaways planned down to the second. What she didn't have was control, because in a moment of stillness so sharp it felt like thunder, AOC didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. And in just 8 words, she didn't just shut Greene down. She rewrote the rules of the room. This isn't the kind of story you'll see on the news, because this isn't about the headlines. It's about what happens behind them, where power is shaped, twisted, and sometimes reclaimed. What you're about to hear is a dramatized account inspired by real public figures and real public pain. The dialogue may be imagined, but the tactics, the tension, and the truth it represents, that's all too real. In a world that rewards rage and punishes dignity, this story asks, what happens when the woman they tried to silence refuses to play along? Let's begin. The morning the letter arrived, the Bronx was wrapped in a kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt loaded, the kind of quiet that comes right before something detonates. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat alone in her district office, the radiator groaning faintly beneath the frosted windows, breath fogging slightly in the air. No meetings, no noise. Just her, a mug of cooling coffee, and a red folder on her desk. Scuffed, bent at the corners, and thick with the kind of paper that cuts when you're not careful. Then came the knock. Not the usual triple tap from her aide, but a single knock, low and deliberate. When the door creaked open, Jalen, her chief of staff, stepped in, his face unreadable, a large white envelope pinched between 2 fingers like it was radioactive. "They want you on Real America Uncensored," he said. "You, live, with Greene." The name hung in the air like a stench. Greene. Before AOC even touched the envelope, the tension had already rippled across the room. Another aide looked up from her laptop, mouth parted. Someone in the hallway froze mid-step. "Decline it," someone said flatly. "It's not a debate. It's a snare." Another chimed in. "It's her turf, her cameras, her edit rooms. They don't want a conversation. They want a collapse." But AOC didn't move, didn't blink. She just stared at the envelope like it had walked in on its own. Then, with a motion too slow to be casual, she reached across the desk and pulled the red folder closer. Its snap opened with a faint click, barely audible, but in that quiet room it sounded like a countdown. Inside, press clippings with her face distorted by headlines, words twisted until they screamed things she never said. A screenshot from a Fox segment where she was called a radical influencer in heels. A memo from a 2021 producer titled, "How to Trigger AOC in 30 Seconds." A freeze frame of her caught mid-blink, captioned, "Unhinged Socialist Snaps on Air." At the bottom of the pile was something newer, a screen grab from Greene's latest podcast. "She's fragile," Greene had said, eyes gleaming. "Push her hard enough and she'll implode. They always do." AOC closed the folder. Outside, the wind howled like something ancient had just been stirred. She stood up slowly, walked to the window and stared out over the street. The subway tracks groaning in the distance. School buses inching through morning slush. Life moving forward like nothing was about to shift. But something was, and AOC could feel it. In her chest, behind her eyes, in the way her fingers curled around the folder like it was more weapon than file. "This isn't journalism," one staffer whispered behind her. "It's performance warfare." Still, she didn't speak. Not yet, because she wasn't weighing whether or not to go. She was deciding how to go. And then, without turning around, she said quietly, "If they want a circus, I'll bring the history they're afraid of." No one replied. They didn't have to. The room knew. She'd already made her choice. She placed the envelope atop the folder, like sealing a pact. Whatever was coming, it had already started. The office emptied slowly, like the air had thickened, warning everyone to leave before something began. But AOC stayed still, alone again, staring at the envelope. It hadn't moved, but it might as well have grown fangs. The red folder lay beneath it, closed now, but not quiet. Her fingers hovered over the paper. Not because she was hesitant, but because this wasn't just another media stunt. It was an invitation to walk willingly into a machine built to eat women like her alive, smile while doing it, and thank them on the way out. But this wasn't the first time. Number she had been here before. The memory came uninvited. 2020, the pandemic still raw, hope still flickering. AOC had agreed to a remote interview with a mainstream network. She came prepared. Data on housing inequality, vaccine access, climate policy. She spoke for 45 minutes. Thoughtful, calm, but when the segment aired 2 nights later, her sentences had been carved like meat, a stitched-together Frankenstein of quotes that turned reason into rebellion. One clip went viral, her saying, "We can't return to normal," cut right before she added, "because normal was already broken." It spread like oil and fire. AOC wants to destroy America's way of life. The networks didn't correct it. They celebrated it. 2 weeks later, a principal in her district was fired after being featured in a Fox exposé. The story claims she'd been radicalizing students by distributing a handout that included a quote from AOC on racial justice. No context, just grainy classroom footage in the word indoctrination, flashing in red letters. He was suspended, never got his job back. No camera ever returned to apologize. AOC's grip tightened, her thumb pressed hard into the envelope, crinkling its corner. These weren't isolated incidents. They were instructions dressed as accidents. A system perfected in prime time, designed to build villains out of clarity and hysteria out of calm. And Greene? Greene was just the latest showrunner pretending to ask questions when she was really loading bullets. But this time, they hadn't just picked a target. They'd picked a witness. She stood and crossed the room, her breath steady now, her pulse like a slow drum. She opened the folder again, not to read, but to remember. There it was, the letter from the suspended principal, handwritten in blue ink. "Tell them we're not scared. They may fire me, but they don't get to erase you." AOC ran her hand over the page once, then closed the folder like sealing a promise. And just like that, the doubt, if there ever was any, dissolved. She would go, but not on their terms. This wouldn't be an ambush. This would be a reckoning. She picked up her phone, dialed her communications director. "We'll accept," she said, her voice even, clipped, like every word was lined with steel. "But it goes out live. No pre-tapes, no cuts, no replays, no edits. They want America to see me, then America will see everything." On the other end of the line, silence, then, "You're sure?" "I'm not walking into a trap," she said. "I'm walking in with the blueprint of how they build it." She hung up, walked back to her desk, slid the invitation into the folder, like the final receipt. Then she did something strange, something quiet. She reached for a sticky note, one of those bright yellow squares she rarely used, and scrawled 8 words in capital letters. "The truth doesn't need to raise its voice." She stuck it inside the cover of the folder, right above the first page. Just a reminder, just a warning. This wouldn't be about volume. It would be about vision. She looked up at the wall across from her desk. The framed photo of Dolores Huerta marching, fist raised, sun blazing off her shoulders. AOC didn't raise her fist. Didn't need to. She reached for her coat, slid the folder into her leather bag, and walked toward the door. The wind outside had picked up. Cold again, but not aimless. This wind had direction. As she stepped outside, phone already buzzing with reaction and risk, her voice settled into her mind like narration. "If they built a stage to humiliate me, I'll let them perform their downfall. And this time, they'll do it live." And with that, the show had already begun. The folder wasn't read by accident. It had always been read, deep, almost blood-toned, as if it had absorbed every insult, every smear, every attempt to erase the truth, and had chosen to wear it like armor. And now it was hungry for more. The day after accepting the invitation, AOC cleared her calendar. No press, no fundraisers, no policy roundtables. This wasn't a campaign moment. It was a prelude to battle, And she wasn't preparing sound bites. She was preparing receipts. Her office, normally humming with movement, became quiet, not with fear, but with focus. She sat at her desk for hours, surrounded by piles of old files, court rulings, screen captures, ethics complaints filed and buried. One by one, she sorted through them, not with panic, but with surgical precision. She added a newly printed document to the folder, an FCC violation report filed in 2021, dismissed without follow-up, detailing how a Greene-aligned talk show had digitally altered congressional footage to suggest AOC had cheered during a defund the police protest. It was false, but it had trended. Next went the annotated transcript of a House hearing, the original version versus the one aired by Greene's media allies, where entire sections had been cut to make her sound reckless. Her notes in the margins were brutal, underlined in red ink. Not a mistake. A script, then came the screenshots. Tweets long deleted. Posts shared by Greene's staff with images of AOC behind bars captioned, "One day." But it wasn't enough to collect proof of distortion. AOC needed more. She needed to map the mechanics of how these attacks worked, who whispered them, who amplified them, who profited from them. At one point, her assistant brought her tea. She didn't look up. "Thanks," she murmured, her eyes scanning a PDF titled Media Tactics, Eliciting Hostile Responses from Female Officials. It had been leaked in a journalism ethics class at NYU. The folder kept filling, layer by layer, receipt by receipt, truth by ugly, undeniable truth. And then, just before sunset, she paused. Her eyes landed on an envelope in the corner of her desk. It wasn't official. No stamp, no return address. Just a name written in shaky handwriting, Luce M., 11th grade, Bronx High. AOC slowly opened it, already knowing what it was. Inside was a letter. No date, no punctuation, just raw. "They told me I couldn't use your quote in class. They said it was too political, but it wasn't even politics. It was the line you said about dignity being louder than insult. I wrote it in my notebook, and they sent me to the principal. But I want you to know I still believe you." The ink had smudged at the edge. Maybe a tear, maybe just time. AOC stared at the paper for a long time, longer than she had anything else that day, because in that moment the folder didn't feel like evidence anymore. It felt like responsibility. They weren't just trying to humiliate her, they were trying to train the next generation to be afraid of being like her. She folded the letter carefully, then placed it inside the very front pocket of the folder, the spot she usually saved for legal references. And as she did, something in her spine straightened. They didn't get to decide who was too political to be quoted. Not in her district, not in her lifetime. She stood, walked across the room, and clicked the folder shut. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Not a snap, a seal. Then she moved to the window. Outside, the Bronx skyline glowed with the last breath of daylight. Brick buildings gilded in amber, steam rising from vents like ghosts lifting from history. Children's voices echoed from a playground nearby. Someone shouted over a stoop. Life, unbothered. But for AOC, everything had sharpened. This wasn't about preparing for a debate. It was about preparing a reckoning. She pressed one hand to the window pane, cold against her skin. And for a second, the city reflected her face back. Tired, steady, unblinking. They wanted her rattled. They wanted her reactive. They wanted a fireball. They had no idea she'd spent the last decade learning to burn without smoke. She exhaled once, slow and final. Then said, almost under her breath, "They want a performance. I'm bringing history." And behind her, the folder sat waiting. Heavy, silent, and finally ready. The studio didn't feel like a place where news was made. It felt like a war room. Low lights, no windows, air heavy with recycled silence, and the sour buzz of burnt coffee. No laughter, no movement, only purpose. Cold, calculated purpose. Marjorie Taylor Greene stepped inside without knocking. She didn't need to. This wasn't someone else's set. It was hers. Her name wasn't just on the show notes. It was in the lighting scheme, the graphics template, The way the camera tilted ever so slightly upward when she sat, elevating her, literally above the conversation. She didn't greet anyone. She didn't have to. Her presence said enough. The room shifted as she entered, not in fear, but in submission. Producers sat straighter. Editors leaned in. A field coordinator quietly dimmed the overhead fluorescence, bathing the control room in the glow of 10 synchronized screens. The live feed window sat at the center, empty for now, but soon to be filled with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's face. At the back wall, a large whiteboard loomed like a scoreboard. 4 words written in red dry erase marker, all caps: bait, trigger, clip, loop. Below it, a flowchart. Start with friendly banter. Shift tone at 3:45. Insert racial dog whistle at 6:00. Cut to reaction. Isolate frame. Repackage by 10. PM Greene moved straight to the board and underlined clip with a fresh red marker. Hard. Deliberate. Then turned to her producer, a wiry man in a Patagonia vest who smelled like stress and hubris. "Walk me through the bait again," she said, not as a question but a command. He didn't blink. "We open soft, mention her district, say something about economic struggles, then pivot. Abortion stats, gun violence, maybe BLM fatigue. By minute 6, we hit the optics line." Greene arched an eyebrow. "The one about her being angry in every frame?" The man nodded. "Exactly. If she pushes back, we frame it as aggression. If she stays calm, we frame it as cold. Either way, we own the headline." From the editing bay, a young assistant raised a hand nervously. "What if she flips the narrative, like facts, receipts?" The room went still for half a second. Then Greene smiled. That rehearsed, serrated smile she wore when preparing to mock something that dared stand still. "Let her bring a stack of paper. Viewers don't read, they react." A few chuckles. The assistant sat back down. The segment director leaned in, adjusting a headset around his neck. "We've pre-rigged the cut-ins. If she gets too steady, we can cut to angry AOC B-roll, that clip where she slammed her hand during a budget hearing." Greene twirled the marker in her hand like a dagger. "Perfect. Remind them who she is, or who we say she is." The flowchart grew more detailed by the minute. A script not for news, but for manipulation, dressed in patriotism. Meanwhile, in another tab on the lead producer's monitor, a browser window with A/B-tested thumbnails ready for upload. Titles included AOC melts down on live TV, Greene obliterates socialist agenda, watch AOC dodge every real question. No one in the room discussed policy. No one brought up issues. No one asked what mattered to voters, because none of it mattered. This wasn't about truth. It was about narrative control. And Greene understood the rules better than anyone. Truth doesn't trend. Outrage does. She moved toward the makeup chair, brushing lint off her blazer, but not sitting. Not yet. "How's the camera angle?" she asked. The lighting tech answered without hesitation. "Soft filter on her, neutral daylight on you. You'll pop, she'll fade." A nod, satisfied. "Any last-minute surprises?" Greene asked the room. The executive producer glanced at his phone, checked a message, then looked up. "She agreed to the live format, no edits." Greene's smile froze for a fraction of a second. Then came the shrug. "Good. America should see what happens when radical confidence meets actual questions." But beneath the bravado, something flickered. Not fear, not yet, but the nagging discomfort of unpredictability. Because the one thing no one had accounted for was what AOC might do if she didn't take the bait. And in a machine built to provoke, a woman who refuses to perform can break the entire script. The countdown began, and somewhere the folder was already being opened. The cue cards weren't questions. They were scalpel blades, sharpened and color-coded. Stacked on the director's desk, each one bore a talking point cloaked as inquiry. The first line was deceptively civil. "Let's talk about what's happening in your district." Beneath it, a string of keywords: highest abortion rates, gun deaths per capita, declining family structures. The subtext wasn't curiosity, it was corrosion. designed to infect before the audience even realized it was poison. Greene leaned over the cards, tapping the corner of one with a manicured nail. "Start soft, then hit her where it's already bleeding," she muttered. Her producer smirked. "We've tested the phrasing. Statistically, any mention of abortion plus minority communities triggers an emotional spike in both demographics." Another aide chimed in. "Mention socialism 3 times, but space it out. Once near the intro, again when she explains policy, and once during the closing. Frame her as disconnected, idealistic, dangerous." On screen, they loaded a clip, an old debate from 2 years ago. A young black congresswoman, articulate, composed, seated across from a panel of hosts, at first calm, then provoked. A racist insinuation disguised as a joke, a mock smile, a sigh, and then the moment. Her voice cracked, her hands trembled. She tried to defend herself. It didn't matter. That 3-second reaction became the story. They called it the jackpot episode. Ratings spiked 400%. Sponsors renewed overnight. "We just need her to flinch," the director said, eyes locked on the monitor. And Greene? She didn't look away from the clip. She rewound it, paused at the exact frame where the congresswoman's mouth opened in disbelief, eyes wide, soul exposed. "Right there," Greene whispered. "That's the money shot." They all nodded. This wasn't a political event. This was performance warfare, and optics were the artillery. The lighting team adjusted contrast ratios. Cool blue tones for Greene, subtly desaturating AOC's feed. "Makes her look harsher, less human," one technician said, "especially if she raises her voice." Another assistant prepped the reaction cam. Tight lens aimed solely at AOC. The directive was clear. If she speaks too quickly, cut to a freeze. If her tone rises, isolate her eyes. If she responds with fire, loop it without the context that sparked it. Greene's personal media coach stepped in with posture notes. "Tilt your chin. Maintain eye contact even when she's speaking, but don't blink too often. Gives you the upper hand visually." She pulled out a laminated card labeled Disruption Timeline. Minute 4, interrupt. Minute 6, pivot with sarcasm. Minute 8, launch moral superiority line. How dare you lecture Americans on values when your own community's collapsing? And the closer, a personal attack, a whisper of scandal, fabricated or inflated. It didn't matter. The rule was simple. Finish with an accusation too big to answer in the time left. Greene nodded through every instruction like a seasoned actress preparing for her monologue. But beneath the smooth rehearsals and practiced indignation, a calculation churned. Because deep down, she knew the truth. If AOC stayed calm, if she held her line without a single visible crack, the entire strategy risked imploding. And Marjorie didn't plan to lose airtime to Grace. "You have to make her break," the lead producer reminded. "If she doesn't fight back, she wins by standing still. So get under her skin, pull focus, bait the fire." Greene pulled the final card from the stack, the one with AOC's misquoted 2019 speech, edited to make her sound un-American. It was dishonest, intentionally out of context, but it would trend. And that, in this room, mattered more than truth ever would. The segment director clicked his stopwatch. 4 hours till showtime. Final camera test in 20. The room began to scatter, but not Greene. She stayed behind, staring at the board once more. Bait, trigger, clip, loop. 4 words, 4 steps. And in her mind, a 5th, control. Because that's what this was really about. Not winning, not debating, not truth. It was about who controlled the frame. What Greene didn't realize, not yet, was that AOC had seen this board before. Not literally, but in every debate, every smear, every televised ambush she'd ever endured. She knew the formula, knew the rhythm. What they didn't know was that she had written her own script. And this time, she wasn't stepping into a spotlight. She was stepping into their frame to burn it down from the inside. No lights, no crew, no scripted entrance, just a plain wooden chair, a wall clock ticking faintly in the background, and a woman sitting still, like steel waiting to be heated. There was no pre-interview, no lighting test, no makeup team brushing powder over her cheekbones. The studio's glam squad had offered. She declined. This wasn't a red carpet moment. This was an interrogation chamber, and she came to cross-examine the system, not decorate herself for it. AOC sat at the center of the room they'd assigned her. An empty prep suite, white walls, no windows. The kind of space designed to keep people quiet and uncomfortable. It wasn't accidental. These rooms were designed to erode composure before the cameras even rolled. But AOC didn't shift. She didn't pace. She didn't scroll. Instead, she did something no producer in the next room could understand. She sat, completely still, in her lap the red folder. Closed, unread now, because everything inside it was already engraved into her bloodstream. She wasn't here to rehearse her lines. She wasn't preparing zingers. That's the game they wanted her to play. Rage to clip, headline to hashtag. She wasn't rehearsing what to say. She was rehearsing what not to react to. Because she knew exactly how the stage was set. She had walked through it 100 times before, not with her feet, but with her history. She knew the triggers they would plant, the weaponized pauses, the patronizing smiles, the faux compliments before the swing of the axe. She knew they would try to make her explain her right to speak. They always did. What they didn't know was how deep her restraint could cut. Across the hall, Greene's team was adjusting camera filters and loading emotional landmines. But here, silence. Not awkward, not empty. Strategic, measured, deliberate. Her mind combed through the incoming attacks like a chess master studying an opening they'd seen before. Abortion rates in the Bronx? Pivot to health funding slashed by Greene's own party. Socialism smear? Ask them what part of investing in schools instead of prisons makes them nervous. Fatherless homes jab? Trace the legislative breadcrumbs that led to systemic family destruction. But she wouldn't say these things in defense. She would say them like a surgeon uses a scalpel. Not to provoke, but to reveal. She closed her eyes, steadied her breathing. Control wasn't weakness, it was leverage. And in a culture that rewarded explosion, nothing unnerved them more than a woman who refused to flinch. They didn't fear her voice, they feared her calm, because calm meant calculation, and calculation meant control. And control, for a woman like her, wasn't supposed to exist. Not in their script, not on their set, not in their America. A faint knock, the stage manager letting her know it was time. She stood slowly, collected, lifted the red folder like a veteran soldier picking up a medal that was never meant to be awarded. Not to someone like her, not the angry one, not the loud one, not the one they had painted in 1,000 headlines. Always too much of something, too passionate, too political, too brown, too bold, too unapologetic. She adjusted her blazer, not to impress, to anchor herself. A small, invisible ritual, quiet as a prayer, sharp as a blade. She walked toward the studio entrance without a word, heels silent against linoleum, folder tucked tight under one arm. Outside, applause was being cued. Studio lights powered up. Monitors flickered to life with pre-selected angles. Hosts rehearsed lines they pretended were spontaneous. And somewhere in the control room, a producer whispered, "Ready the reaction cam." She's walking in. But they weren't ready. Not really, because they had designed this to collapse her, to capture fury, to extract an outburst. What they didn't design for was what would happen if she walked in and refused to perform. The applause wasn't real. It was recorded 2 hours earlier. A warm-up crew had instructed the audience when to laugh, when to clap, and when to boo, not based on belief, but on cue cards. Now it played again, loud, thunderous, hollow, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped into the studio. She felt it immediately. Not just the noise, the design, the intent. Patriotic music blared from overhead speakers, dripping with brass and overcompensation. Red, white, and blue floodlights pulsed across the set like a campaign rally on steroids. In the front row, carefully selected audience members, each wearing matching flag pins and practice sneers. The studio wasn't a space for discussion. It was a cage match. She didn't flinch. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. AOC walked to her chair and sat, spine straight, hands resting calmly atop the red folder. The lights caught its edge, casting a sharp shadow across the desk. It was the only unscripted thing on that stage. Marjorie Taylor Greene turned to the camera with a smirk that had been polished in a mirror. Her voice honeyed, her tone dipped in vinegar. Well, 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 welcome to the woman who thinks TikTok is policy. Laughter erupted, or at least the illusion of it did. Piped in through earpieces, echoed off hidden speakers. A button pressed, a narrative formed. Greene leaned back like she just delivered Shakespeare. The audience ate it up, or at least acted like they had been told to. AOC didn't move. Not a blink, not a breath. Her face unreadable, her eyes steady. She wasn't offended. She was observing. Because when a lion walks into a trap it's already seen coming, the question isn't how it will escape. It's how much damage the trap will take before it breaks. Greene chuckled to herself, turning to the side camera. We're thrilled to have Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez here, activist, influencer, professional protester, and of course, part-time economist. Another wave of forced laughter, another flicker of satisfaction behind Greene's eyes. They wanted her to react, to raise an eyebrow, to interrupt, to smirk. But AOC didn't bite, because she wasn't here to trade insults. She was here to let the truth sit long enough to rot their script from the inside. Stillness was her blade, and she knew how to use it. Greene's voice shifted, the sarcasm now weaponized, her rhythm practiced. She pulled a flashcard from her desk. Before we dive into policy, I want to start with something simple. Do you think America's better off today than it was before your movement hijacked the Democratic Party? The trap was subtle. The word hijacked, laced with accusation. A setup wrapped in a question mark. AOC calmly opened the red folder. She didn't speak. She simply laid a document flat on the desk. Visible, sharp, deliberate. A graph. Median household income by district, year over year, color-coded in green. Greene squinted at it. The camera zoomed. No words were needed, because truth laid bare doesn't need volume to wound. Greene laughed again, this time with a tremor. We brought you here for answers, not spreadsheets. But the room felt it. The shift, the tension under the studio lights, the camera lens trying to decide who the audience believed now. In the control room, a tech whispered into his mic. She's not reacting, she's redirecting. Greene tried again. Let me rephrase. Do you believe working-class Americans care more about your progressive wish lists or about the price of eggs? AOC leaned forward. Not with aggression, but with clarity, and for the first time she spoke. Not loud, not sharp, just clear. Working-class Americans care about who writes the grocery prices and who profits when they spike. Silence. Not because the line was a mic drop, but because it wasn't. It was a mirror, and Greene wasn't ready to see herself in it. The host laughed nervously. The audience gave a forced chuckle, but the control room was already flipping to camera 3. They needed a new angle, a new beat, because the narrative wasn't holding, and in her silence, in her refusal to escalate, AOC was doing something far more dangerous than shouting. She was making the room listen. Greene turned the page on her note cards. Too fast. Her rhythm stuttered. Her smile faltered. And for a split second, her eyes darted to the red folder. Just once. But once was enough, because that folder hadn't moved. But it had already shifted the ground beneath her. And the first strike, it had already missed. It didn't take long. By the second segment, the gloves were already off, at least from Greene's side. She sat forward, eyes blazing with the thrill of her favorite battlefield. Accusation without burden. She didn't need truth, just volume and a camera. You represent crime, abortion, and chaos, Congresswoman. No opening, no pretext, just the swing. The audience shifted, some leaning in, others stiffening. The control room turned up the brightness on Greene's close-up. Her team knew what this was, a viral moment in the making. But the woman across from her didn't blink. AOC remained exactly where she was, spine straight, gaze steady, breathing calm. Because she had rehearsed this trap in her mind 100 times. This wasn't a debate, it was bait, and she didn't bite. Instead, with surgical calm, AOC reached for the red folder. No words yet, just movement. Slow, deliberate, like the ticking of a fuse before detonation. She opened it, not to defend herself, but to reframe the battlefield. The studio lights caught the glint of paper as she slid a stack of documents across the desk, facing Greene. Her fingers didn't shake. Her tone didn't rise. She finally spoke, voice low, but clear enough to slice through the performance fog like a blade. 24 clinics closed in the last 18 months. She looked up. The numbers weren't dramatic, but the silence after them was. 17 were in my district alone. Not because of me, not because of chaos, but because of the federal budget your party slashed under the banner of moral values. A staffer in the control room cursed under his breath. This wasn't the clip they wanted. Greene blinked, momentarily thrown. She tried to wave it off, smirking. Oh, please, Congresswoman. You want to blame Republicans for every leaky pipe and every... But AOC interrupted. Not with noise, but with evidence. Another sheet slid forward, then another. Color-coded charts, line-by-line breakdowns of Title X funding reductions, a list of shuttered women's health centers, a CDC brief detailing spikes in maternal mortality rates post-closure. These are not leaks, AOC said, her tone steady. These are hemorrhages, and you cheered them on from your podcast studio. A murmur rippled through the audience. The tension shifted. This wasn't fire. This was pressure, systemic, relentless, controlled. Greene tried to pivot. You talk about care, but you supported criminal justice reform that released violent offenders into communities that aren't even yours. AOC tilted her head. No flinch. Just focus. I supported reforms that removed minors from adult prisons and restored voting rights to nonviolent offenders who had served their full sentence. If that makes you uncomfortable, Congresswoman, perhaps it's not me who's soft on justice. The moderator, a man who had barely spoken, finally glanced up, unsure whether to move forward or just watch, because this wasn't going how the producers had mapped it. The trap was sprung, but the prey wasn't panicking. She was mapping the exits. Greene's voice rose, strained now, more volume than clarity. Your movement fuels lawlessness and dependency. You hand out victimhood like candy and call it compassion. AOC looked down, just briefly, then looked up again, and for the first time, she smiled. But it wasn't smug, it was somber, almost sad. No, Congresswoman, what I hand out is documentation of budget lines that killed shelter beds, of loopholes that enriched developers while families were evicted, of policies designed not to protect Americans, but to punish the ones you find inconvenient. For a beat, the room fell quiet. No canned laughter, no applause, just a live audience watching something they hadn't expected. A young congresswoman refusing to defend herself because she didn't come to escape fire. She came to walk through it with her receipts intact. In the back row, a woman clutched her purse tighter. A man in a veteran's cap nodded slowly. And somewhere in the control room, a technician finally whispered, "We can't clip this. It's too whole." Greene sat stiff, her next card unread. The moment had shifted. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. And AOC, she leaned back in her chair, red folder still open beside her like a silent co-counsel. You brought sound bites, she said softly. I brought evidence. Something had shifted. Marjorie Taylor Greene could feel it in her throat. The room had changed, subtly but definitively. Her sarcasm wasn't landing the way it had in rehearsal. Her jabs weren't drawing the laughs they used to. Even her tone, sharp and acidic, now felt like it was ricocheting off a wall that hadn't been there before. So she did what many in her position do when the room tilts out of their control. She softened, just a little, a tilt of the head, a faux concerned smile, a change in cadence designed to make the next line sound less like a jab and more like a motherly scolding. Look, Greene said gently, I know we come from different worlds, but don't you think people like you should be grateful for what this country gives? A beat, AOC didn't blink, didn't reach for the folder, didn't raise her hand. But something in her posture changed, imperceptibly to some, unmistakably to others. Her shoulders didn't tense. They rooted, grounded, like someone preparing not to speak from opinion, but from history. And when she spoke, her voice wasn't angry. It was ancient, measured, precise. When Jewish Americans remember the Holocaust, she said, each syllable cut with quiet steel, no one tells them to be grateful. Greene's smile froze. AOC leaned in slightly, her eyes locked, not with rage, but with knowing. No one tells them to smile while recounting genocide. No one tells them to lower their voice when they speak of survival, or warn them not to sound angry when they speak of camps, or lynchings, or gas, or numbers tattooed on skin. The room was silent now. No audience reaction, no staffers whispering. Even the producers behind the glass seemed to forget their controls. But when it comes to Black, brown, or indigenous pain, she continued, somehow we're always expected to pair our truth with a thank you, as if injustice is a gift. Her voice didn't rise, it tightened. As if we should smile while burying our sons, applaud while being redlined, say God bless America, while choking on the air that was never meant to breathe us in. Marjorie swallowed hard. Her carefully curled hair felt suddenly too tight at the scalp. AOC didn't stop, because this wasn't an answer to Greene. It was a reckoning with every microphone that ever asked the wrong question. I love this country enough to tell it the truth, and if that makes me ungrateful, maybe the problem isn't me. The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't polite. It was sacred, like the air before thunder. In the control room, the lead producer removed his headset, slowly. No one moved. Greene tried to recover. She looked to the camera, forced a half smile, tried to pivot. I just think America's given a lot of people a chance. But the words rang hollow, because something had cracked, and everyone knew it. The smirks were gone. The soundboard guy didn't hit applause. Even the lighting felt different, softer, quieter, more exposed. AOC didn't press forward. She didn't need to, because that line didn't burn. It echoed. It planted itself in the back of the viewer's mind and refused to be dismissed. Why is it only our pain that's expected to say, thank you? That wasn't a retort, it was a mirror, and some people had spent their whole careers avoiding their own reflection. The show moved on, eventually, but the momentum didn't, because in a single moment, not of fury, but of clarity, AOC had reframed the entire segment, not as a debate between left and right, or between two women from opposing parties, but between truth and performance. And in that moment, the audience wasn't watching a Democrat sparring with a Republican. They were watching a survivor speak to a system that never expected her to survive. The silence hadn't lifted. Not really. Greene could feel it coiling around her, thick and invisible, like a noose of her own making. The last round didn't land. No laughs, no retweets in the making. Just that line. Why is it only our pain that's expected to say, thank you? Hanging in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. She shifted in her seat, then reached for the oldest play in the book. When you can't win the argument, make it personal. Well, she began, voice laced with faux curiosity. Speaking of America, isn't it true your uncle attended anti-government rallies back in the day? It was subtle, framed as a question, a shrug, a nudge to the audience. But it wasn't casual, it was surgical. A dig designed to break the image AOC had spent years building. Calm, articulate, principled. She wanted AOC flustered, defensive. She wanted a clip where AOC stumbled over family. But AOC didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, her eyes flicked to the folder. The red one, slowly, silently, she reached inside. Not for the data sheets, not for the press clippings, but for a single sealed envelope tucked beneath the lining. She placed it on the desk like a quiet bomb. Greene's face froze, because she recognized it. That envelope hadn't been on camera before. It hadn't been opened in rehearsal. This wasn't scripted. You want to talk about family? AOC asked softly. Okay. She unsealed the envelope, pulled out a document, yellowed but intact, stamped, dated, Georgia, 1962. This is a land deed, AOC began, filed by your grandfather, a registered board member of the Southeastern Citizens Alliance. Greene blinked. The SCA was a militia group, AOC continued, her voice calm but slicing, that organized resistance to school integration after Brown versus Board. They trained men to block buses, some carried rifles, some burned crosses, all did it in the name of preserving American values. Gasps, real ones. From the live audience? Greene opened her mouth, but AOC kept going, not to attack, but to excavate. This isn't about blame. This is about patterns, about who gets to weaponize family history and who has to outrun it. She looked directly at Greene. You brought up my uncle, a man who once joined a march against government surveillance. He's never held public office, never passed a bill, never stood at a podium demanding loyalty pledges. She flipped the document face up, the signature visible. Greene. Curtis L. Your grandfather wasn't marching. He was funding. He wrote checks to ensure children who look like me would never sit beside children who look like you. The room went dead still. Not dramatic. Dead. Even the moderator looked rattled now. This wasn't politics. This was bloodline accountability. Greene tried to speak, but all that came out was breath, and AOC wasn't done. So if we're unpacking families, let's do it with both hands, because I'm not ashamed of mine. My uncle taught me that freedom includes dissent, that loving your country means being brave enough to challenge it. She leaned in, not as an attack, but as a reckoning. But your legacy, it wasn't dissent, it was domination. Silence. Every camera was rolling now, not for show, but because no one dared look away. Greene's face flushed. Her hands twitched beneath the desk. Her cue cards lay untouched. The segment plan, bait, trigger, clip, loop, was burning to ash. And AOC? She closed the folder, locked the envelope back in place. You want to play personal, she said quietly, then be ready for the full record, not just the sanitized chapters. The audience didn't applaud. They sat still, processing, because this wasn't the takedown anyone expected. It wasn't yelling or chaos or fireworks. It was a woman who had prepared her entire career to be ambushed, calmly walking into the ambush with receipts in her hands. And the unspoken truth hung heavy. Greene thought she was starting a fire. But it turned out AOC brought the match. There was a murmur, quiet but rising, a strange kind of sound that didn't match any of the audio cues or crowd scripts. Not laughter, not applause, not shock. It was something far more dangerous. Doubt. The audience wasn't reacting anymore. They were re-evaluating, re-watching the debate in real time, but through a new lens. Not who won the point, but what did I just witness? Behind the cameras, the crew moved like ants under a kicked rock. The assistant director whispered furiously into her headset, "Cut to break." Now, a technician reached for the switch, and the screen froze. Not for the audience. For them, the feed stayed live. But in the control room, black, static. A 3-second delay vanished. An error on the TriCaster. A script crash on the live switching software. The emergency cut button blinked, non-responsive. AOC could feel it. Not the glitch, but the panic. So she did what no one in the studio expected. She stood up, not dramatically, not defiantly. She simply rose from her seat, folder in hand, and walked to the moderator's desk like it was a courtroom lectern. If they won't tell the truth, she said clearly, then I'll read it into the record. No one stopped her. There was no record, technically, but America was still watching. She opened the red folder again, slower this time. Not for theatrics, for precision. She pulled the first exhibit out, a photo of a closed women's clinic in Queens. The door chained. A sign in the window. Funding expired due to federal adjustments. This clinic served over 9,000 women a year. Closed after Congress reclassified the grant as non-essential. Greene voted yes. She laid the photo on the moderator's desk. Next, a printout of a radio transcript, a quote clipped and weaponized. Last year, they edited my words to sound like I supported disorder. Here's the full transcript. Here's the audio. And here's the lawsuit we filed. Still unresolved because the defendant changed their LLC name 2 days before court. She placed it gently. The third item, a handwritten letter. The paper aged, the ink smeared with emotion. A high school sophomore in my district was suspended after quoting me in a class debate. He wasn't cursing. He wasn't inciting anything. He said, quote, "We don't owe silence to injustice." The principal called it divisive. The school board never returned my call. A pause. Even the moderator was frozen now, eyes locked on the folder like it was a time bomb. AO looked directly at the main camera. They keep asking me why I won't calm down, why I don't play nice, because calm doesn't close prisons. Nice doesn't reopen clinics. And silence? She tapped the letter. Silence suspends 15-year-olds for quoting their representative. Behind the glass, a producer yelled again, "Kill the feed! Go to national bumper! Just get it off!" But it was too late. They had already lost control. Because AOC wasn't arguing anymore. She was documenting, exposing not just Greene, but the machine that protected her. They said this would be a debate, but they brought cue cards and applause signs. I brought affidavits, receipts, names, votes, facts, the kind they bury behind outrage. She wasn't yelling. She was narrating. And somewhere in the building, Greene was still seated, but visibly shaken. Her staff had frozen. Their notes meant nothing now. They had planned for a meltdown, a viral tantrum, but what they got was a prosecutor in pearls. AOC reached for the final item. It wasn't paper. It was a flash drive. She held it up. This contains email correspondence between congressional staffers and lobbying firms responsible for the very bills that slashed women's health care access in the Southeast. Dated, time-stamped, verified. She didn't even need to say Greene's name. The implication was louder than accusation. The camera light blinked red. Still recording. No commercial break. No edit delay. Just the collapse of the spin room in real time. AOC placed the flash drive on top of the pile, closed the folder. Then for the first time since she stood, she looked out at the audience. Not just in the studio, but across the country. They wanted a clip, she said softly. So I gave them a documentary. No one moved. No one dared. The segment had broken every rule of primetime. But it had done something else too. It made truth unskippable. For a moment, it wasn't a studio. It was a courtroom. No applause sign lit up. No staffer dared move. Even the boom mic above seemed to hold its breath. The cameras, the crew, the crowd, all frozen in the gravity of what had just been placed on the table. And then she stood, not with a flourish, not like someone seizing the spotlight. She rose like someone who no longer needed permission to speak. AOC didn't glance at the moderator. She didn't wait for a question. She walked calmly to the center of the studio floor, red folder in hand, and then laid it down. One thud. It echoed like a gavel strike. She turned, looked directly at Greene, not with anger, with clarity. "You're not afraid of me, Marjorie," she said, her voice smooth as steel. "You're afraid of what happens when the truth refuses to blink." Greene sat still. Her team off stage clutched clipboards and comms, silently praying for a line, a pivot, anything to reclaim control. But none came, because there was nothing left to spin. The red folder wasn't a prop. It was a reckoning. And every page of it, documents, transcripts, signatures, quotes, was still glowing in the eyes of the nation. AOC took one step closer. "I didn't come here to yell. That's your act." She gestured toward Greene's empty cue cards. "And you didn't come here to debate. You came to repeat. Sound bites, talking points, culture war smoke bombs." Another step. "But here's the thing. I stopped playing defense the day I realized your offense is just fear in costume." Greene blinked rapidly. Her breath quickened. A tell. Cameras caught it. AOC didn't press harder. She didn't need to. Truth had already done the work. Instead, she turned to the audience. Not the one in the room, but the millions watching, unsure if they were still tuned into a political show or if history had hijacked the feed. You've been told to fear women like me, to doubt us, to laugh at us, to call us angry when we're just alert, to call us radical when we're just awake. She paused. They told you we're dangerous, but what they meant is that we're no longer silent. She looked down at the folder, then back up toward the control booth, as if staring directly through the glass. If this was supposed to be your spin room, then congratulations. You've spun yourself into a corner, and now the only way out is through the truth. She turned back to Greene. This wasn't a debate, Marjorie. This was a mirror, and I hope, for your sake, you finally look into it. Greene didn't reply. She didn't smirk. She sat, hands clasped, eyes darting, lips pressed thin, not because she'd been shouted down, but because, for the first time in the night, there was no script left to run. And AOC? She simply nodded. No mic drop, no forced dramatics. Just truth delivered plainly enough to shake pillars. She walked back to her seat, not as a guest, but as someone who had just taken the host chair without asking. The moderator fumbled for a close. We'd like to thank our guest for tonight's... But the outro didn't matter. The clip had already been created. The moment had already gone viral, not for its volume, but for its stillness. A woman stood. She spoke, and everyone else sat down. It began with a ping. Just one. A tiny notification on a forgotten account with 10 followers and no profile picture. An account called it Rehearsal, cut 7, uploaded a 41-second audio clip at 2:13 a.m. Eastern. No hashtags, no caption. Just this. Push her. Bait her. We need a viral clip. Crying is ideal. Breakdown's better. In the background, muffled studio voices, a rustle of papers, the click of a lighter. A producer's voice, recognizable to anyone in network news, continued. If she walks out, perfect. If she yells, gold. If she stays calm, cut it in post. Silence followed, then laughter, cruel, calculated, confident. By 3 a.m., the clip had 1,000 shares. By 7 a.m., it had 12 million. By noon, it was headline news. Every network tried to distance themselves. Unofficial, out of context, not representative of editorial values. But it was too late, because the voice in the tape wasn't anonymous. It was tied to a senior executive producer from Real America Uncensored. And this time, the receipts weren't hidden in a folder. They were playing on every smartphone in America. Corporate sponsors panicked. Within hours, 2 Fortune 500 companies pulled all ads from the Greene AOC segment. One issued a statement: "We do not endorse programs that manipulate women, especially women of color, for entertainment value." Another went further: "Our values do not align with intentional psychological baiting for political theater." The backlash wasn't performative. It was seismic. Clips of AOC's calm, unshaken demeanor now replayed against the leaked tape. And the contrast was radioactive. She hadn't taken the bait. She had buried it. Meanwhile, in the Bronx, AOC sat in her office. She didn't gloat. She didn't post a victory tweet. Instead, she read the comments. Not the blue checks or pundits, but the ones from teachers, nurses, delivery drivers, high school debaters, women who said they'd been baited too. I've been in that room. Not a studio, but the boardroom. Same trap. You gave me words I didn't know I needed. They wanted to break you, but I saw someone who'd already learned how to hold power without holding hate. Outside her window, camera crews began gathering. Again. But this time they weren't there for a gotcha moment. They were hoping for a statement, a quote, a reaction, but AOC didn't rush out. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and whispered just 3 words. Let the tape speak. Across the country, media schools scrapped their lesson plans to play the leaked audio alongside AOC's televised silence. One professor tweeted, "This is no longer a debate. It's a case study in psychological warfare, neutralized by intellectual precision." At Fox's headquarters, emergency meetings turned into resignation emails. PR firms were called, lawyers activated. One insider texted a journalist, "You don't understand." That folder didn't just expose Greene. It exposed all of us. And Marjorie? She tried to spin it. At a press event, she claimed the leak was fake, AI generated. Leftist propaganda. But then a former intern confirmed its authenticity. And worse, another clip surfaced. Same studio, same producer, different date. Next week, let's find another Latina, younger, TikTok following. Ratings love tension between them. That clip broke the internet because it wasn't about one debate anymore. It was about how power preys on performance. By sunset, #RedFolder wasn't just trending. It was a movement. AOC didn't need to defend herself. The system had indicted itself. And the most dangerous thing she'd done? She had stood still. It didn't feel like a press conference. It felt like testimony. No applause, no flashing bulbs. Just a podium, a single mic, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, standing like history had finally come to collect its debt. Behind her were not political allies, but legal minds, civil rights attorneys, trauma researchers, a woman in a wheelchair whose family had been targeted after a Fox segment misidentified her as a welfare cheat. This wasn't optics. This was memory turned legal strategy. AOC looked out at the sea of cameras and said, not with rage, but with radical clarity, this isn't a lawsuit, it's a historical correction. Gasps weren't audible, but the silence said more. Then she held up the filing, 147 pages thick. This, she said, is what you do when someone builds a system to monetize your humiliation. The claim wasn't vague, it was surgical. Count Y, defamation with reckless disregard for truth. Count 2, emotional exploitation for commercial profit. Count 3, racial and gender targeting via scripted provocation. Count 4, negligent emotional manipulation under color of journalism. Every count backed with evidence. Emails, call logs, memos with phrases like maximize meltdown, clip value. We want her cracked, not compose. One memo included a risk chart. If calm equals 0.5 million views, if emotional equals 5 million. That wasn't commentary. That was intent. Intent to reduce a congresswoman into a meme. Intent to bait a legacy into a spectacle. Intent to break, not debate. What they didn't realize, AOC said slowly, is that I didn't come to play chess. I came to dismantle the table. Behind her, a giant screen displayed timeline footage, freeze frames showing when producers muted her audio mid-sentence, cut to stock footage of rioting during her healthcare response, even piped in audience laughter not from that taping. This wasn't an accident. It was an algorithm with a flag. Her name triggered it. Her skin fed it. Her calmness disrupted it. That was the true danger. Because an angry woman of color, predictable, profitable. But a composed woman of color, uncontrollable, unscripted. AOC continued, they don't want policy, they want provocation. They don't fear my words. They fear I might say them without blinking. The lawsuit asked for $90 million, but AOC made clear, this number isn't about me, it's a signal that for every silent erasure, there is a ledger waiting to be settled. Reporters scrambled. This wasn't just breaking news. It was breaking format. AOC didn't just press charges. She pressed rewind on an entire genre of televised humiliation disguised as debate. And as her legal team laid out the strategy, showing how post-production edits had changed the meaning of entire exchanges, how stage lights were adjusted to make her appear harsh, how guest placement was chosen to block camera lines of empathy, one thing became clear. This wasn't an isolated event. It was a blueprint. And AOC had brought the receipts. Marjorie Taylor Greene released a 4-line statement calling the lawsuit desperate theatrics. AOC didn't even mention her name, because this wasn't about one woman. It was about the machine that built her, fed her, weaponized her, a machine now caught in its own echo chamber. That night, the lawsuit trended worldwide. Not under AOC versus Greene, but under a different hashtag entirely, #WeAreTheEdit. Thousands posted moments where they were silenced, misquoted, baited, or erased, from classrooms, boardrooms, police stations, news segments. AOC logged off. She didn't need to trend. The truth was doing it for her. The final quote from the press conference didn't come from her mouth. It came from the bottom of the last page of the lawsuit, handwritten in black ink. History doesn't whisper. It subpoenas. The figure made headlines. $90 million, a number that stunned even her supporters. But when a reporter shouted, "Why so much?" across the marble lobby, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't hesitate. "Because Jim Crow lasted 90 years, she said, and this system was born from its bones." She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Because the number wasn't random, it was a reckoning. 1 million for every year where silence was currency, where a woman like her couldn't speak without permission, let alone correction. The media spun the amount as outrageous. Excessive. The network Greene represented called it extortion dressed in activism. But AOC had already moved beyond the noise. Because for her, this wasn't about noise. It was about echo. Echoes of clip segments, flattened history, and generations of women of color edited out of the national record unless they cried, cracked, or conformed. Behind closed doors, she read letters, ones no camera would catch. A nurse from Missouri who was forced off air after correcting a statistic on maternal mortality. A high school senior whose graduation speech was cut from local TV when she mentioned her undocumented mother. A former news anchor who lasted 1 year after refusing to change her hair. None of them wanted fame. They wanted acknowledgement. AOC held their stories like evidence, like scripture. And when asked by a legal analyst what winning looked like, she said, "It looks like someone being able to speak without being weaponized. It looks like a little girl watching the news and not learning to shrink." The red folder wasn't just heavier now. It was sacred. Inside were not just talking points, but testimonies. Not just rebuttals, but remembrances. And as sponsors fled Greene's show, as headlines began shifting from scandal to systemic truth, AOC refused to gloat. "I don't need them to fall," she told her staff. "I need the cycle to break." But the moment that would define everything didn't happen in court or on camera. It happened when a retired janitor showed up at her district office and slid a yellowed photo across the desk. A black and white image of his grandmother standing at a whites-only fountain, eyes proud, hands clenched. On the back, just 7 words in pencil. They edited her out of the paper. That's when AOC knew. This wasn't about Fox, or Greene, or even her. It was about repair. And to repair, you don't just cut the rot, you name it. So she did. In a closed-door briefing with journalists, she outlined the emotional math behind the lawsuit. "They cut me mid-sentence," she said. "Then they cut to fire footage, crime footage, poverty clips. That wasn't a mistake. That was choreography." The journalists shifted. Some nodded, some didn't. It didn't matter. Because she wasn't asking for approval. She was stating the record. And as the court date neared, Greene's lawyers scrambled to dismiss on First Amendment grounds. But AOC's team anticipated it, because this wasn't about opinions. It was about a system that disguised psychological warfare as programming. She ended that week with a message to her base. Not a campaign email, not a tweet. A handwritten note posted in her district office window. It read, "This isn't for me. This is for every woman who's ever been edited into silence. We weren't too angry. We were too honest." Within hours, photos of that note went viral. Women began writing their own versions and taping them to local news stations, college bulletin boards, courtroom doors. Hashtag edited no more trended globally. In some ways, the lawsuit had already done its job. It pulled back the curtain. It made invisible strategy visible harm. It gave language to wounds that had long been called overreactions. But the most radical part wasn't the lawsuit itself. It was the framing. AOC never asked the public to feel sorry. She asked them to remember, and in remembering, to act. As she told a group of young girls touring her office, "I didn't ask for this platform, but if I'm standing on it, I'm going to call the sound engineer by name." One girl asked what she meant. AOC smiled. "It means no more pretending the clip is the truth. It means pulling the full tape, all of it." And as that girl nodded, AOC closed the red folder one more time, not as a weapon, but as a witness. The courtroom wasn't ready for the sound, not just the volume, but the venom. As the first audio clip played, an eerie silence fell across the gallery. Jurors leaned forward. Reporters froze mid-keystroke. It was the voice of the senior segment producer at Real America Uncensored, his tone casual, calculating. Here's what we need. Push her, bait her. We need a viral clip in the first 5 minutes. I want a reaction. Doesn't matter what she says, just catch the face. AOC sat still at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, watching not the screen but the jury. It wasn't about what they heard. It was about what they understood. The defense objected, tried to label the audio irrelevant editorial prep, but Judge Mahoney overruled without hesitation. This isn't prep, she said. This is choreography. Then came the emails. Exhibit A, B, C, each more damning than the last. Projected in massive font behind the witness stand, one read, "She'll crack if Greene brings up race in TikTok. Loop her reaction with crime stats. Should spike with older males." The courtroom gasped. The file name? AOC Reaction Strategy V3 Final. Another email from a programming exec read, "This isn't about policy. It's about provocation. Marjorie's job is to light the match. AOC's job is to burn. Capture the moment, edit it later, sell it." A young juror blinked rapidly, jaw tight. AOC never turned her head. Her red folder remained sealed in front of her. A silent reminder. She had seen this coming. What rattled the courtroom wasn't just the receipts. It was the brazenness, the callous business plan of media warfare. One internal chat message included laughing emojis after referencing AOC's family. "Maybe we throw in the uncle stuff if she stays too calm. Nothing punches like family dirt." The word punches was underlined. In a handwritten note from Greene's personal assistant, shown as Exhibit D, the phrase, "Don't let her get technical," appeared twice, followed by "mock the folder if she brings it." The same red folder now sat like a loaded weapon inches from the jury. The prosecution asked to replay a specific portion of the show where Greene smirked and said, "You're good with folders, Congresswoman. Shame you're not good with facts." Side by side, the jury saw the live clip and the real-time chat from Greene's staff. "Boom. That'll trend. Clip it. Run with stats overlay." A legal analyst for the network was then shown advising via email, "Don't worry. Even if she sues, it'll die in pretrial. We've got precedent. Just don't admit intent." The final message shown read like a confession masked as confidence. "She can't prove we baited her. We've baited better. Ask the Kamala team." That line hit the room like a slap. AOC slowly stood, not to speak, but to retrieve something from her folder. A single-page printout. She handed it to her lead counsel, who raised it for the record. A memo from an ex-intern, anonymous, detailing the emotional color wheel used by Real America Uncensored to segment live reactions. Anger equals 30% more shares. Tears equals 45%. Blank stare equals drop. Edit accordingly. The prosecution looked at the jury and asked one question. If this is journalism, what does propaganda look like? AOC didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her power wasn't in the punch. It was in the pause. And in that courtroom, even silence had weight. Greene's team scrambled. They argued context. They said the term bait was colloquial. But the emails didn't flinch. The audio didn't apologize. The strategy was surgical. And now exposed. Court broke for recess, but no one left the room quickly. People stood in the aisles, stunned, whispering. AOC sat back down, gently tapped the red folder, and whispered to her aide, "That's just Exhibit A." The aide nodded. They thought they were building a bonfire. AOC replied, eyes locked on the jury. "They built a case study." And as the judge's gavel echoed, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a trial about defamation. It was a trial about design, about the machine behind the moment, and the woman who refused to let it run unchecked. When AOC finally took the stand, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't wave her hands, didn't cry, didn't break. She simply adjusted the microphone, looked to the jury, and began. "My fury was never for show, but my silence was." The room, which had witnessed screaming headlines and hot mic scandals, now listened to a tone so measured it silenced even the whispers. "For years I've been called radical, dangerous, un-American, but never by name. The attacks always wore masks, welfare queen jokes, words like urban decay, talk of real Americans as though the rest of us are just shadows. They didn't come after my arguments. They came after my cadence, my lipstick, my last name. She paused, not for effect, for breath. Because this wasn't performance. This was the aftermath of being baited 1,000 times and bleeding none. They knew I wouldn't scream, so they built storyboards to make it seem like I did. Paused the video when I blinked, lowered the bass when I breathed, and clipped my sighs as sound bites. A juror leaned in. Another put down his pen. AOC didn't look at them. She stared just past the cameras as if speaking to every girl who'd ever been told she was too loud by men who feared she'd speak at all. They wanted a meltdown. I gave them a mirror. They expected chaos. I gave them context. And when that didn't go viral, they made their own version of me. Edges sharpened, words rearranged, volume manipulated. She lifted the red folder, slowly, let it rest beside her elbow. This folder doesn't hold secrets. It holds patterns, receipts, timestamps. This folder is not just about me. It's about every Black woman muted mid-answer, every Latina over-talking the anchor just to finish a sentence. Every Asian student told her English was too perfect to be real. The defense squirmed. The courtroom didn't blink. "I'm not asking for sympathy," she said, voice level, calm as a calm can cut. "I'm asking for record, for history to mark that this happened, that media learned to monetize distortion, that silence became a strategy, not a symptom." The judge cleared her throat, but not to interrupt, only to swallow what the gallery now felt. That something honest had just been said in a room full of performance. AOC nodded once. No closing line, no dramatic exit. She simply stood, returned to her seat, and closed the folder. It didn't snap shut. It settled, with a sound like truth landing where it always should have been. There were no gavel bangs, no televised breakdowns, no camera swooping victory laps. Greene's team, quiet and pale, signed the settlement papers in a side room far from the press. No admission of guilt, just a number scribbled on a check and a non-disclosure clause they prayed would muzzle the echo. But AOC didn't walk out with money. She walked out with momentum. Standing outside the courthouse, no podium, just her voice carried by the wind, she didn't claim vindication. She unveiled the Legacy Folder Legal Fund, a war chest for every woman slandered for speaking while female. "They tried to edit me out of history," she said. "I'm making sure no one else gets cropped out again." And with that, she handed the mic to the next voice in line. No headline could capture it. No caption could pin it down. Just a statue, bronzed in defiance, unveiled under a gray sky that seemed to hold its breath. AOC, not with a fist raised or finger pointed, but frozen in the precise second before the answer that rewired the nation. Her posture still, back straight, the red folder clutched at her side like a declaration of memory. Not yelling, not breaking, just ready. Below her feet, one line etched in stone. "They built a stage for my silence. I used it to speak for millions." The auditorium held its breath as AOC stepped up to the podium at Howard. No teleprompter, no choreography, just her voice, measured, unshaken. "Free speech does not mean consequence-free cruelty," she said, eyes locking with young women whose names the world hadn't learned yet, but would. She didn't stay for applause. She didn't need to. She placed the red folder, worn, heavy, now legendary, gently on the podium. A student in the front row stood, then another, and another. No one was told to move, but the folder didn't sit there long. The future had already reached for it. She didn't win by raising her voice. She won by refusing to make herself smaller just to be heard. While others chased applause, AOC chased precision. Where Greene threw fire, she held the line. No outbursts, no tears, just a gaze that cut deeper than sound bites ever could. The red folder didn't just carry facts, it carried restraint, resolve, a blueprint for resistance that didn't rely on spectacle. In the end, she didn't outtalk Greene. She outlasted her, because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits, and when it speaks, it says, "The truth doesn't trend." It endures, not take the bait. AOC didn't win this showdown by yelling louder. She dismantled a weaponized narrative with calm, clarity, and conviction. Her silence was never weakness. It was strategic, grounded, and deeply rooted in purpose. In a world obsessed with going viral, she reminded us that integrity isn't always loud, but it always lands. This story isn't just about politics. It's about reclaiming dignity in the face of distortion, about knowing when to speak and when to let the truth speak for itself. What would you do if your silence held more power than your voice? Sometimes the strongest mic drop is choosing not to scream. Choose poise. Choose impact. Hashtag truth endures. Hashtag power without noise. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.